First, I'd like to say that as we was singing that last song, "It Is Well With My Soul," and knowing what we've talked about that song in here, and what that gentleman went through. There's a lot of people that would just throw their arms up and give up.
Indeed.
And that goes to show you how much faith he had. But anyway, as we were singing that song, it was touching, knowing what we've talked about how he lost his entire family and everything in the ocean and all. Not only his family, he lost everything, his house and everything. So, what have we learned about the word grace? I know how I define it, and I know how our pastor Davey has defined it, and that's how I'm going to continue to define it, because it's in simple layperson terms, meaning God's done it.
Indeed. Amen.
So, and Jesus' grace is amazing, and that leads me to want to talk about the song "Amazing Grace," page 257. It says, "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures. Yea, when this flesh and heart shall fail, and mortal life shall cease, I shall possess within the veil a life of joy and peace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow, the sun forbear to shine, but God who called me here below will be forever mine. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun." In the first verse, when I was at work, and there was a lady was talking about this song, and it's not my current job, it was a past job, and she was talking about this song, and she was talking about how her father turned to alcohol, and she talked about how he would not stop drinking, and it overtook his life. It overtook some of his family life, and it was so bad that he started having, of course, health problems with his liver and all his major organs. And one of his major organs was affected, and he became blind. And she said that after he passed away, she decided, or the family decided, that he was blind and he couldn't see, and they had to help him everywhere. And she said the song that they played at his funeral was Amazing Grace. And in that first verse, it talks about, I once was lost, but now I am found, was blind, but now I see. I couldn't help but think whenever she was telling me this story, which her and I are close, that this wasn't the author's purpose in this verse for a person to be blind. That's not what this verse means, is a person being blind. But now after he passes, now he can see. That's not what this verse means. What this verse means is we are blind to the truth. We are blind to the gospel. And the author was not blind anymore. He could see what the Lord had done for him.
Amen.
Is what it means. And so, as she was telling the story, I knew in my heart that I let her tell it and everything, and I didn't debate it. But I knew that was not why, after studying the song and knowing what was going on in the song.
Amen. And
what the author's purpose was for that first verse.
Amen.
So, in the summer of 1725, in the city of London, England, John Newton, who you can see on page 257, wrote the words to Amazing Grace. He wrote the words to Amazing Grace in 1779. He was born in 1725. His mother was a devout believer. She taught her son to pray, and she filled his mind with scriptures out of the Bible. But it was John's father, an often absent sea captain, who captured the boy's imagination. John dreamed of sailing the wild seas and going to adventurous destinations because he watched his father instead of his mother, is the way I interpret that. When John was nearly 7, his mother became ill and died. John was taken in by distant relatives who mocked him for his belief in God and discouraged him from praying. Unhappy and lonely, John turned again to his dream of the sea, and at the age of 11, he ran off to become an apprentice on his father's ship. His father did not desire a close relationship with his son. Therefore, John was rejected and disappointed again. For years, John sailed the seas and went to ports where he found inappropriate behaviors. After a short stint in the British Navy, he deserted and ran away to Africa to seek his fortune and new adventures in the African slave trade. The wife of the slave dealer he signed up with was terrible to John. She imprisoned him, beat him, and forced him to eat off the floor like dogs. Believing death was preferable to his treatment, he escaped into the West African forest and eventually to the Atlantic coast. After lighting signal fires, he was finally spotted by a passing ship's captain, who sent a small boat to shore to pick him up. The captain thought that John had treasures, but instead, John was penniless. He was a runaway. John was put to work as a shipmate, but got into trouble and sent below deck, where it was thought he would stay out of trouble. There he pondered on his empty life. And some gospel fell into his hands, and he recalled the lessons his mother had taught him while he was down below in the bottom of the ship. As the ship neared Scotland, severe winds and rain battered the ship. Every able-bodied person on board helped to keep the water out. Exhausted, frightened, and facing certain death, John had a life-transforming experience with God at that time. The assurance of God's love flooded his soul. He described it as a miracle of God's grace. A few years later, he married Mary Catlett, a devout Christian. Not long after that, he left the sea and he became a preacher. He composed over 280 hymns, but his most remembered and most popular was Amazing Grace. So, thankfully, as a child, and as we was little kids, and our parents or parent was a member of this church, that we did not, there was times, of trials and tribulations, but we did not stray far from the gospel. And like the author who wrote Amazing Grace, he strayed off. He had trials and he had tribulations, but where did he go back to whenever he was in trouble and when he was scared and when he needed help and when he needed comfort and when he needed peace? Where did he go back to? He went back to the gospel, who was introduced to him by a parent.
Amen.
So, that's all I got.